Hey y'all, let's look at Mark 12:18. And the Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife, but leaves no child, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and when he died, left no offspring. And the second took her and died, leaving no offspring. And the third likewise. And the 7 left no offspring. Last of all, the woman also died. In the resurrection, when they rise again, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had her as wife. Jesus said to them, Is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are quite wrong. So in this scene, Jesus is being faced with the second of a handful of challenges from various religious groups that are opposed to Jesus. The first was the Herodians and the Pharisees together. This group is the Sadducees. And in all of these situations, they're not looking for the truth. They're looking to trap him. They're looking to confuse him. They're looking to confound him. They're trying to make him look like a fool. They're kind of like people who come up with a little clever argument they think sort of trounces the idea of God and are trying to catch somebody up in it. A little word about the Sadducees. This was a group that was most affiliated with the people in leadership in the temple. They were usually quite wealthy, quite connected, quite powerful. And as the text says, they did not believe in angels. They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. They were actually, I would suggest, threatened by the resurrection of the dead because they saw the current economic state of affairs as God's judgment. And if you're on top of the heap, you can see why you wouldn't like the idea of another judgment coming that might overturn or upset the current balance of affairs. Well, that's precisely what Jesus has said he would do from the beginning. So they bring him this little riddle, as it were. It's not a true scenario, but it's something they've made up to try to catch him up. And it involves the law of levirate marriage. In the Old Testament, if it says, as a man died and was married and had no children, his brother was supposed to have a child with his widow so that that child could take over the inheritance. So it was a law meant to perpetuate the name and the family line of the person that passed. Well, they try to mock this by saying, well, if you are married more than once, and let's just say up to 7 times, whose wife will you be? So again, I would suggest they're not actually trying to find out if the resurrection is true. They've got their position, and they're going to mock a position that's not theirs. And I think it's worth reflecting on this in our current day and age when that's what most people do. They have their position. They're not out looking for the truth. They're not out to consider, maybe I'm wrong. And they just want to mock people who have a different position. And that usually reflects a total lack of interest in really understanding the position. So Jesus rebukes them on 2 points. He says, you're wrong on 2 counts. Number 1, you don't understand the Bible. And number 2, you don't get the power of God. So let's look at the power. Well, so he says, because look, in heaven, nobody's going to be given in marriage. They're going to be like the angels. Now, what's his point? There's not going to be man and woman? I don't think that's his point. I think his point is, in our current state of affairs that God began from the beginning, the species has to procreate. It has to pass on from one generation to the next. And that's what marriage is for. That's one of the major purposes of marriage, is to fill the earth and continue to fill the earth from one generation to the next. But Jesus says in the resurrection, there will be no need for that because people aren't going to die. People are going to live forever. They're eternal beings. And so marriage as we know it will no longer exist in the terms that we know it. When Jesus says they'll be like angels, the point is angels aren't given in marriage. They don't marry and have kids. And so that's what Jesus is trying to get at with this. He suggests too, and this is throughout the Gospel of Mark, that marriage itself is an image of something greater, that all of the wonderful joys and blessings of marriage are only a shadow of a hint of a greater fulfillment, which in other places we see is the marriage of Jesus to his bride. So he makes it clear that they don't understand the power of God to raise the dead, to undo death, to bring in a whole new order of affairs. And then he says, and I think this is worth noting, he says, well, have you never read that in Exodus chapter 3, God says, I am the God of Abraham. Now, just a side note on mentioning Abraham. If they had thought much about Abraham, they would have thought about the power of God to bring life out of death, right? Because God, you might say, almost raised from the dead, from Abraham's body through Sarah, to have Isaac. So first of all, there was an opportunity to get the power of God. But second of all, just in this one statement, Jesus says, I am the God of Abraham. The point is, it doesn't say, I was the God of Abraham. But now Abraham's dead and he's gone and that's it. It's all over. He says, no, I am the God of Abraham. Suggesting that if God's covenant with Abraham and others only lasts as long as this life, then that covenant is meaningless. But when God says, I am, it extends to, or it implies a promise that his relationship that he makes with people will last forever, and that lasting is going to take the form of the resurrection of the dead. So I want to underline that the scriptural teaching of the resurrection of the dead is the resurrection of bodies. It's not a sort of a disembodied state. Jesus makes it clear that God likes the human person as he made him, flesh and spirit, and that he intends not the doing away of all of that, but the fulfilling and the fulfillment of all that. And of course, he says it will be a new order of being, but it won't be a lesser order of being. It's not going to be a lesser state of affairs. It's going to be a greater state of affairs. So Jesus is here underlining the very Christian teaching that all of us are eternal beings designed to walk in fellowship and friendship with God and join with him in ruling over an ever expanding, ever good creation. And once again, Jesus just dismisses this attempt to confound him and confuse him. So may we know the one who says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Through Jesus, may he be our God, so we know and live in the hope of the promise of the resurrection of the dead. Amen.